So thank you. I'd like to thank the organizers and the session chairs for the opportunity to present the results of the qualitative sub-study focused on experiences of women in Cape Town with study-provided open-label PrEP. As soon as I figure it out. Got it. By way of background, as most of you know in this room, adherence in PrEP randomized controlled trials with women in sub-Saharan Africa had mixed results. Some studies showed very low levels of product use by way of drug levels, and that was in contrast to some pretty high rates of self-reported product use. Subsequent work that's come out in the last couple of years has highlighted the dynamic facilitators and barriers that influenced both product use as well as over-reporting, several of which relate to the context of being in a randomized controlled trial and use of a drug of unknown efficacy. In the ADAPT study, we had the opportunity to explore experiences with open-label PrEP, provided in a context of explicit efforts to minimize over-reporting. I'm not going to go through the methods entirely for the main sample, as Bob just reviewed them, but to remind you that it was a younger cohort, and they were on self-administered PrEP for 24 weeks. Of the 179 women participants in Cape Town, we engaged 60 in qualitative interviews using a mix of convenience and targeted sampling. 42 women participated in focused groups, and 18 women participated in in-depth interviews, evenly distributed across the arms. We used framework analysis to organize the main themes emerging from the content that was asked about in the semi-structured qualitative guides. I encourage you to come to our poster to hear a bit more about what kinds of factors emerged when we asked people about facilitators and challenges to PrEP use, facilitators of participation as well as erosion of engagement. But for the purposes of my time with you, I'm going to focus on the overarching themes or cross-cutting themes. And these are themes that emerged from narratives that really bridged across interviews, across content areas, and across discourse. We heard several important things. One was we heard a theme of a very high value of reciprocity to one's community as being paramount. That is very consistent with the South African worldview of Ubuntu, where one's contributions are really weighted heavily against the extent to which they can benefit one's community. We also identified healthy skepticism. We heard a lot about fears and concerns about PrEP and its safety. Fears and concerns about the integrity or trustworthiness of the trial or the procedures used in the trial. We heard about the influence of community, important others, and fellow participants in amplifying those concerns. And we also heard people talk about variable approaches to product use, ranging anywhere from active avoidance of use of study product all the way to real championing of PrEP use as well as engagement in the study. We used those narratives to really develop a framework that integrates how one approaches study-provided PrEP in the context of several dynamics going on, dynamics between the person, the community, and the study. We know when we think about study-provided PrEP, we know that there's a range, right? We know it goes all the way from intentional avoidance to high persistence, high adherence, and there's a couple waypoints in between that are important as well, and that would be variable persistence, where you're kind of on again, off again with trying even to take the regimen. And then even if you're engaged with trying to take the regimen, you may do so in terms of execution with variable levels of success. And that would be in terms of taking doses at the times that they're recommended. In the discourse throughout the groups and the interviews, we saw that one's approach to study-provided PrEP is highly contextualized by the value of social or personal resources that are afforded through participation, social political history with biomedical research and medical institutions in the community, identity attributes. Who do I see myself as a participant? How do important others see me? What kind of identity does the community give me as a participant and as a PrEP user? And also in terms of the cultural worldview, where I will weight my contributions heavily in terms of whether or not my community is going to benefit from my efforts. as well as product attributes like regimen burden, ease of use, match to context. So to us, when we asked the question of how do people approach study-provided PrEP, we needed to understand that in the context of dynamics between the community, the participant, and the study. Now, these dynamics that we identified, they're really different ways of people negotiating tensions and synergies between community, self, and study product. But they produce different approaches to study-provided PrEP, and they have unique implications for intervention, and also depend heavily on alignment with study. Our framework here, called the model of mutuality, we developed based on the narratives, talks about 4 different unique dynamics ranging all the way from distrust to mutuality. And even though this framework has a lot of implications that I'm particularly excited about in terms of interventions, in terms of what should you target, in terms of how can we engage individuals in the trial, and also is based on hundreds of excerpts and quotes. For the purposes of this talk, in the scope of the time that I have, I'm going to narrow my comments to really just explaining the unique characteristics that we identify in each dynamic, how it associates to PrEP, and also an excerpt that highlights some important aspect of that dynamic. The first dynamic is one of distrust. And here we see a rejection, or it's really characterized by experiences of a rejection of the study product. It's not safe. A rejection of the integrity of the study, to not be trusted, or the potential reciprocity of ever getting benefit from this back to my community. As you'll see at the quote at the bottom of the slide, I will never drink these pills because I don't trust them. One would fully expect that someone experiencing a distrust dynamic would have intentional avoidance of use of PrEP. Additionally, if they continue to come to study, they will likely not be apt to disclose non-use. And in fact, in some ways, to manage the tension of being a participant in a study that I don't believe in, I may be much more apt to try to help my community by dissuading others from using, which is particularly problematic when you think about the next dynamic, which is one of uncertainty. Here we identify a skeptical weighing of whether or not someone's really going to commit to trying to use this product or commit to this study. You would see a cautious exploration. They're not sure. Can I trust it? Can I not trust it? This is a time of tension because it's typically uncomfortable to be in the flux of a decision-making process for any significant period of time. And it's also a time of open vulnerability to being influenced by others. And you can hear the quote at the bottom of the slide saying, I was getting confused and pressured because I did not know whether to continue to take the tablets or not. The approach to study product that we would expect there is variable persistence with PrEP. So taking it when they're on the side of feeling like, yeah, I can trust this, I can do this, and then moving away from it as something happens or they're experiencing the side of being really concerned about the safety. The next dynamic is alignment. And alignment is characterized by a provisional acceptance. So I'm going to try. I think that these drugs are pretty safe. I think that this study could be good for me. It could be good for my community. So I'm committed to give this a shot. And there you would expect to see good persistence. So I'm going to keep trying to take the regimen. However, I'm probably going to have variable degrees of success with doing so for a number of barriers that we're all fairly familiar with. So you would see variable adherence to PrEP in that dynamic. You can hear the commitment in the quote at the bottom here of, I wouldn't do that, in reference to not taking the pills, because I want to see if these pills really, really work. Finally, the dynamic of mutuality. And mutuality came from discourse we heard where people were clearly showing ownership over the trial. So participants were not in service of the trial. This was definitely participants seeing the trial as serving their needs, their goals. You heard a lot in terms of advocacy, which I think is well exemplified in the quote provided here of a woman pushing back to the community. And I said, look here, ask me, and don't you dare say I have HIV, telling everyone in this shop. We're doing research here to see whether pills can prevent someone from HIV. So here you see people really going out in the community and trying to tip the negative perceptions. A lot of advocacy. I would call these the champions. And in terms of study-provided PrEP use, we would expect both good persistence and good adherence. I'm not going to be able to get into this too much, but I did just want to mention that this has a lot of implications for how we work with individuals in our trials. For example, the one-to-one kind of talking about what barriers did you experience with taking a dose, why'd you miss, let me help you with that. That's a really common strategy we use and would be highly important for everybody that's really in that alignment place. I've made a commitment, I am trying, let's talk through how I might be able to do better. But there's other quadrants where it wouldn't be appropriate. For example, in the distrust dynamic, it may actually further someone away and position them even further in the distrust. In the mutuality dynamic, you talking to me about me missing a dose may seem very disempowering when it's something I've already adopted. Recommendations from this model include do not assume that participants enter a study in a neutral beliefs or with trust in a study. Products and studies need to prove themselves as valuable, safe, and trustworthy. We need creative, engaging, community-focused ways to integrate community into research through community-based participatory research practices as well as other strategies. Promote exploration, allow people to be skeptical, and make that an overt phenomena as opposed to one that's done outside of the study. And also enhance trust in trial and reciprocity for contributions. Limitations I just wanted to note is that this is a model that's based on qualitative narratives of a specific group. May or may not generalize to other groups. It may not generalize to real PrEP use. The model is a proposed framework. It also requires validation and measures of mutuality dynamics. However, in conclusion, I want to say that the proposed mutuality model offers one framework for understanding really those intersections between community, participant, and study and how they multiply influence one another. It's consistent with findings with other work in this area, and it's synergistic with models of community participatory research as well as action-based research. Our contention is that product use and PrEP use, it occurs in a context where safety and beliefs about the benefits to self and community are necessary preliminary conditions for optimal uptake and use to even have a chance of occurring. I'd like to acknowledge the funders of this work. I'd also like to acknowledge the Cape Town qualitative team, particularly Melissa Wallace, who really spearheaded a lot of this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Reve. So the qualitative research team in Bangkok, Thailand was led by